You're listening to the Alchemical Tech Revolution, and I am your host, Wayne McRoy. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are around the world tonight. We're going to discuss the mystery of the StarGate. What is going on in the world today? Well, we've seen a lot of interesting things coming to fruition in recent days here, and of course, quietly going on in the background just weeks ago, after the inauguration of President Donald J. Trump into the White House once again, he made a big announcement regarding artificial intelligence and a $500 billion program called the StarGate Project, which the federal government and some of the agencies adjacent to that would be working with private corporations to build a new AI infrastructure here in the United States of America, starting with some facilities in Texas and moving from there. And of course, you had Larry Ellison up there talking about using this artificial intelligence in order to cure cancer and all kinds of other promises in the biotech industry. You see, he said that this artificial intelligence, well, it would eventually be able to determine preemptively whether or not you would develop cancer through a simple blood test, and they would be able to use this blood test and be able to tell you not only if you would be getting cancer at some point, but then they would be able to develop an mRNA vaccine treatment for you, personalized to your very own genetic information, within 48 hours, and inject you with this ostensible cure for this cancer that you don't have yet, but you may develop in the future, according to the AI. I find all of this very concerning, especially since now the attention has been shifted away from this. And of course, just days later, you have the unleashing and unfurling of this new Chinese DeepSeek technology onto the scene and decimating the tech sector for a number of days in the stock market. All of these things coming to fruition right around this very same time frame. And it seems to me it's a bit of a distraction now going on, because there's other things that are front and center, all of the fraud that the alleged Department of Government Efficiency is finding in the federal spending, and you have all of these other distractions primarily going on. And they've diverted attention away from the StarGate project. But I assure you, ladies and gentlemen, this is one of the most important things going on behind the scenes right now on the world stage. What are they talking about? Why did they name this thing StarGate? Well, we're going to get into that tonight, because the association has always been there, and many of you have never really been able to connect the dots to understand exactly what it is that's relevant about this, aside from the obvious political machinations behind it, and the statements of other political figures of the past that maybe put it into a little bit of a better context. Remember when George Bush, the senior George Bush, talked about a new world order and the 1,000 points of light? Well, what is this 1,000 points of light? We're going to touch upon that a little bit tonight. And we're going to touch upon the reason why this project is named StarGate and how it associates not only with the occult, and it always ties back to the occult. As much as I wish that wasn't the case, it always does every single time. And I know I sound like a broken record, but I have to reveal the truth to you. That is my mandate. That is my job here. It always ties to the occult. And you'll see it also ties directly to the advent of transhumanism. Always these same two places turn up in all of these discussions. So tonight I'm going to read an excerpt from my own book that I wrote back in 2019 and published early in 2020, titled Cybernetic Messiah, Building the Antichrist System. I've been on about this stuff for a long time, ladies and gentlemen. I was telling people about these things long before they came into active use in this world. So we're going to get right into it. The question of the nature of consciousness is a mystery that has captured the imaginations of mankind for untold generations. The understanding of the workings of the human mind has baffled scientists and philosophers for all of human history. Likewise, religious and philosophical traditions of the ancient world have been similarly misunderstood by modern-day scholars. The modern-day hyper-materialist view of our science has led us far astray of the more subjective spiritual aspects of the study of human consciousness. Religious traditions and philosophies have always held an integral part in the study of consciousness, so negating these ideas with the hyper-materialist model of reality creates a huge gap in our understanding. Our modern science has limitations that do not lend well to the study of consciousness. I'm going to pause for a moment here. You'll notice a lot of AI research has very much to do with the notion of what is consciousness. And can a machine ever become conscious? Can it become self-aware? Can it become sentient? That's at the heart and soul of what we're studying. What is consciousness? What does it mean to be conscious? Well, this is a mystery that has perplexed mankind for all of human history, as we've just discussed here. Let's get back to reading here, though. Studying consciousness is a highly subjective thing. The objective tools of the scientific method simply cannot quantify something subjective, and that is where our modern understanding falls apart. The study of consciousness requires the more subjective spiritual tools provided by the context of religion, philosophy, and, most importantly, mythology. It is through the use of these filters or lenses that we can begin to examine the nature of human consciousness and cognition. It is equally important to apply the objective tools of science where we can as well, but the scientific method simply cannot be the sole tool used to try to understand human consciousness. And I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. Although they have attempted to quantify consciousness in very many ways, and one of the ways in which they've done so is through a model of the brain called Bayesian mind, or the Bayesian brain model. And this has given them a tool for attempting to quantify consciousness. But aside from that, it's not something that could be readily explained as a cause and effect sequence in physical materiality here, as they would like it to be. Not completely, anyway. But let's get back to the reading. The technocratic elite are very familiar with these concepts. These oligarchs and social engineers are given a much higher quality form of education than the rest of the lower classes are. They are still taught classical concepts such as mythology, literature, and the classical liberal arts. The classical liberal arts refers to teachings that are drawn from the trivium and quadrivium, educational tools that are largely not used in the public school system today. They teach ideas such as grammar, logic, and rhetoric, which are a missing piece of our thought processes in our modern society. At least they are missing for the vast majority. Now, I'm going to pause for a moment just to point out that there are some private institutions of education that many of the quote-unquote elites of this world send their children to that will still teach you these classical liberal arts and this way of thinking. They will learn about mythology. They will learn about the arts of rhetoric, grammar, and logic, and how to apply them. Now, by and large, this does not apply to the vast majority, especially those who attend public school. We're not taught these things. And therefore, we're missing some important precepts. But let's get back to it. The elitist class are taught these principles and therefore are taught how to think, whereas the bulk of society are basically indoctrinated, taught to memorize and repeat information, and to listen to and respect authority figures. Essentially, they are conditioned to follow orders. Much of this stems from the Prussian education system. This is the system that our modern Western school systems are based upon. The education system is an important tool for manufacturing the consent of the ruled by the rulers, usually in a disingenuous manner. In just 2 or 3 generations, a group can be socially conditioned to accept just about anything by using the school system as an indoctrination center. Our school system is geared more toward behavior modification than toward actually educating anyone in any meaningful way. And I'm going to pause for a moment here. And this is absolute veritas right there. Our modern education system is designed basically for purposes of behavior modification and indoctrination. They are not there to educate anybody or to teach anybody how to think for themselves. They are just there to socially engineer the masses. That is sadly what our Western education system has become. And we see that every day, don't we? Let's get back to it. Once again, all of this is based upon the hyper-materialist view of the world. Although the social controllers are fully aware of the spiritual nature of things, they seek to eliminate this aspect of our reality, at least for the vast majority. They cannot control a free-spirited being, so they do their best to stifle the spiritual growth of mankind, thereby trapping him in the materialist animal mindset. Gonna pause for a moment here. That's absolutely what this is all about. They want to keep you in a responsive state. They don't want you to be able to think critically. They just want you to respond. Stimulus and response, like an animal. Remember the story of Pavlov and Pavlov's dog. Same kind of thing. They want to instill a behavior in you. They want a reaction from you. They don't want you to think critically and formulate your own methodology for moving forward. They want you to react in a very predictable type of a way. And they've done an excellent job of engineering the masses in this way. Let's continue reading. This is why they view us as cattle or human resources. All of media and entertainment is designed to keep us in this low-minded animal state. This is done through the use of a concept called arrested development. This concept is used to lock us into a childish mindset to make us more easily controllable. This process stifles our spiritual and intellectual growth and essentially just turns us into cogs in the big machine that is our civilization. Our civilization is vampirized by these elitist controllers, who constitute a separate, breakaway civilization. They use disingenuous, underhanded means to rob us of our labor, wealth, and liberty to achieve their own selfish goals, and their ultimate goal is to become the gods of this place. They use us as resources to achieve this end. They have learned to use the old alchemical or natural sciences to manipulate the minds of the masses, and in so doing, changing our reality around us to conform to the new image of man that they want to achieve. I'm going to pause for a moment here. A lot of important ideas to break down in this. You may have heard this term, arrested development. You see, they have purposefully engineered the bulk of humanity, the bulk of society, especially in Western culture, to be emotionally on the level of a middle school-aged child. Somewhere in the 12 to 13-year-old age range, emotionally. So therefore, if they keep you locked in this childish state, you need a father figure or an authority figure to lead you even though you think you know enough stuff on your own to function independently, you still depend upon Big Brother in order to meet your needs. That's exactly where they want you. And they've been engineering a new image into mankind for a length of time now. And this is a very important concept, and I've touched upon this innumerable times in the past. The image is an important idea because it is through the image that a thought becomes manifest. It becomes manifest first as an image in the mind, and then later through the stepping down process of manifestation, it will come to fruition in our physical reality in one way, shape, or form. But it starts as an image or a blueprint or an archetype in the mind. And this is how they leverage ideas against us without us knowing. They leverage the archetype implanted in our mind, and we bring it forward through our own power. And they use us as tools to bring about this new society, this new world order that they want to see put in place. Let's get back to the reading, though, because I'll touch a little bit more on this as we progress. This concept of the image of man is an important one to understand. This refers to how mankind views himself and his place in this reality in which we exist. It also shapes the direction we go as a society. When the image of man is changed in the public consciousness to adapt from one age to another, the whole paradigm then shifts to reflect this change of mindset. Our reality then fundamentally changes as a reflection of the change in our minds. The social controllers change the image of man by invoking the archetypes of mythology. Our worldviews are slowly shifted to conform to these archetypes that they are invoking. Through the use of cybernetics, they inject the mythological archetypes that they desire into the minds of the masses, primarily in the form of entertainment. Here's how this works. Let's break down the term entertainment. It literally means to go in and capture the mind. This is the vehicle to implant ideas into the subconscious mind. Entertainment. Think about that. Let's continue. The archetypes that they invoke will usually reflect the desired outcome that they're looking for. This is often referred to in conspiracy circles as predictive programming. I'm going to pause for a moment. So maybe now you can understand why The Simpsons will tell you so many things. They like to use cartoons. Have you noticed that? They like to use cartoons as a tool to program the human mind. Especially cartoons that are geared more towards quote-unquote adults. This is more of the Arrested Development going on. They use cartoons an awful lot as a source of revelation of the method, if you will. Let's read on. Oftentimes, the underlying mythical archetypes being represented are not apparent on the surface, but the archetypal idea is definitely reinforced in this way. All of these things operate on a principle that I have invented that I call metaphysical consent. I don't have a better term for it. I haven't heard anybody else develop a better term for it, so that's what I'm going with. I call it metaphysical consent. And certainly, we can understand why as we break it down a little further. Let's get back to the reading. The elite controllers learned long ago that violating the free will principle leads to karmic consequences. Therefore, they always seek out a type of a contractual agreement in order to manipulate your mind. They cannot do anything to you or on your behalf without your tacit consent. That's the reason why they present ideas to you in the form of entertainment. When you see this and don't object to the content, that is viewed by the social engineers as your tacit consent to the ideas presented. Gonna pause for a moment. And now you know a little something else about entertainment. Why do actors and entertainers and athletes and all of these people that are in the public view, they're strictly for the purpose to entertain society? Why do you think they make so much money? They are very much rewarded for their part they play in manipulating the human mind in this way. Let's continue reading. These ideas and principles are all constructs of the human mind. The human mind is the conduit through which an archetypal idea becomes manifest in our reality. Therefore, the human mind can be considered to be a gateway or portal through which something from the archetypal world we discussed could enter into our reality. I'm going to pause for a moment. Now, earlier in the book, I discussed this concept of these different worlds of manifestation, this stepping down process into manifestation that the dark occultists who run things know about and leverage against us all the time. And those within the secret society groups talk about. The Rosicrucians refer to the 4 different worlds, and it starts with the archetypal world, and there's different names for this in the different occult philosophies and schools of thought. But they're all basically the same idea. You have this stepping down process from the source, which usually has to do with the reflection starting in the mind from the spiritual side of things, and then stepping down through the astral and the etheric, and then into the physical. And this is how manifestation occurs according to the secret doctrine of the various schools. So they use this method of invoking ideas, archetypes, and bringing them into manifestation through the gateway that is the human being or the human mind. Now you'll see how this gets a little bit more convoluted a little bit later on as we progress a little further here. And you'll see how it relates to the very things we're talking about as far as artificial intelligence and the nature of the StarGate project. This is the main reason why there is a war on for our minds. The technocratic elite want to be able to control the influx of new information from what could be considered to be an alternate dimension or a different level of manifestation, and of course I'm referring to this archetypal world. They have been attempting to reproduce this gateway concept and simulate the human mind through the use of supercomputers and particularly quantum computers. However, they have thus far been unable to even come close to the creative power of the human mind with these computers. The idea of a uniquely human creative power is also referred to in some esoteric circles and most of the secret societies as the generative force, or more simply, just the force. Gonna pause for a moment. And you thought George Lucas invented that concept, didn't you? No, this goes much deeper than that. But we are given these archetypal representations in the modern mythology that is Star Wars. There's an awful lot you can learn about the occult by watching Star Wars, ladies and gentlemen. And we're only scratching the surface. Let's get back to the reading. This generative force idea also encapsulates the concept of human reproduction. It is intrinsically tied to sex. This is the reason why sex magic is a highly prevalent thing among those who belong to the various secret society groups and the occult fraternities, especially the ones on the darker side of things. This creative force concept ties directly to the idea of the mind as a type of a gateway. Not just the mind, but also the human body as a type of a gateway. This is especially true for the female body. The female body is a direct gateway of physical manifestation into this world. It is really a miraculous thing. This fact is actually proof of concept for the gateway of manifestation idea that we were just talking about. Gonna pause for a moment. Think about that. The human body, the female human body, brings forth new individuals into this world, new human beings. They come into fruition and manifestation through this gateway. That in and of itself is proof of concept here that the human being is the gateway between worlds. Of this there can be no doubt. Let's read on. The mind has similar abilities to birth something intangible into a tangible reality. This intangibility doesn't make a conceptual idea any less real. The legal term intellectual property is proof of concept for this idea. Think about that. Think about the idea of intellectual property. You come up with an idea and you patent that idea, and that idea is yours legally because you patented it, regardless of whether you actually built the thing or created the thing or not. That is proof of concept as well, that the human mind has this type of ability. This creative force, creative power, as a gateway into manifestation. Now, we're going to get a little deeper here, and we'll begin to connect the dots. So, as we just said, this intangible idea coming through the gateway of manifestation into the human mind, this intangible thing, starts there and becomes something very real, and this is proof of concept of the gateway idea. And we're going to continue reading, and this is where it will become abundantly clear to you. In occult circles, some refer to this idea as a stargate. The term stargate in actuality makes inference to Venus, the morning star, also known as Lucifer. The term stargate, therefore, infers connotations to a very specific natural energy. It invokes the power of the archetype of Lucifer. Gonna pause for a moment here. So now do you understand why they named this artificial intelligence project Stargate? Like I said, it always ties back to the occult. As much of an uncomfortable concept as that is, it's always present, ladies and gentlemen. It's always there. It never fails. But let's continue. Lucifer is also known in some of these systems as Prometheus, Mercury, Hermes, Horus, the Devil, and various other names as well. In occult ritual practice, they refer to the human body as a stargate only under special, specific circumstances. These special circumstances relate to a ritual for producing a concept called the Moonchild. We won't get much into that here, but this concept does share some startling correlations to transhumanist ideas. Gonna pause for a moment here. The human being as the Stargate. You see why they need to tie the artificial intelligence to the human being? This is the only way they could bring into manifestation this lofty idea that they have, this indwelling of the Moonchild, if you want to go there. And perhaps we'll delve a little deeper into that on a future episode here. This is about the old alchemical process of creating a homunculus. But of course, you could see the connections and correlations to transhumanism, can't you? If you have any type of a background in researching any of this stuff, if you know anything about the occult, if you know anything about technology, you can certainly see the one-to-one correlations made here. Let's read on. Transhumanism is a thoroughly Luciferian philosophy and is actually far older than what our modern interpretations would have us believe. The lack of success by the technocrats in creating an artificial intelligence or supercomputer capable of utilizing this creative force has led them to the ultimate conclusion that the only way to accomplish this gateway technology or this StarGate technology is to merge the human being with the machine, and that is the real motivating force behind the transhumanist movement promulgated by the dark occultists who run the show at the very top of the power structure. Is it beginning to make sense to you yet, ladies and gentlemen? Why did they call this StarGate? Well, this is what they're saying is going to be the infrastructure for the AI control grid here in the Western world. Well, they're not necessarily calling it a control grid, but that is most certainly the intention behind it. Let's continue on and we'll begin to give a little more context to this. The creative force, as it's called by the occultists, is a free gift from God to humanity, and it also directly relates to the free will principle, which is also a free gift from God to humanity. Only God, the Creator, can impart this ability to His creation. The human being is endowed by his Creator with a small fractal portion of His creative power. The technocrats and dark occultists seek to amplify this fractal power and imitate it at the same level as that of the Creator, but have thus far not been anywhere close to being successful at this endeavor. And I'm going to pause for a moment to say that they never will be either. It is only God who can give us that divine spark. That is why they have failed miserably in building these artificial intelligence platforms that they think can become greater than man. They cannot. They lack this divine spark. They are not made in the image of God as the human being is, and at some level, high up in the chain of command of the power structure of this world, these dark occultists who run things, they understand that intimately, that this thing will never have life within it. That's why they seek to merge the artificial intelligence with the human being and hijack the life principle. Let's continue reading. The natural world in which we all exist belongs to God alone, and these dark occultists and technocrats cannot create something from nothing, so they lack the ability to duplicate the creative force of the Almighty. They are limited by this finite realm, and so they seek to create a lesser realm within this realm that they can control. They seek to create new worlds in which they are the rulers. This has actually been happening for a very long time. They started out creating these new worlds within the minds of men. They are not They are not literal physical worlds in the way we think of the natural world. These artificial worlds exist only in the minds of men, yet they are all around us and affect us in every aspect of our daily lives. The perfect example of this is the absolute fact that our society has been structured into a legal fiction. I'm going to pause for a moment. Think about the idea or the notion of the legal fiction. Ponder upon that for a little while. Look at the name on your driver's license. It's all in capital letters. That's because that represents the legal fiction. It's not really you, it's the straw man identity. We do commerce based upon this legal fiction. We do most of our activities in the world based upon this legal fiction. Let's read on, though. Likewise, media of all kinds presents us with images of our reality that do not necessarily reflect the true nature of events, people, places, or things. The flickering images of your television present you with glimpses into these fictitious artificial worlds that only exist in your mind. The primary method that these social controllers have seized upon to try to duplicate the creative force of the Almighty is to try to control your perceptions of our reality. By presenting you with false narratives and false images, they can alter your worldview and therefore steer your creative energies into modeling the fictitious world they want to create and control. I'm going to pause for a moment. Now, let's take a look back with some hindsight here of the events of the past 5 years now. You'll notice how they crafted the whole narrative of the COVID scamdemic that they laid out upon us. And regardless of whether there's an actual physical illness or some such thing that was utilized in this way or not is immaterial, look at how they crafted the narrative and made people believe in a thing that probably wasn't even really there to begin with. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Now, when the technology becomes invasive to the point where they can read your thoughts and implant thoughts in your head, think about how much worse this will get, and we may be there already. Hard to say for sure, but there are some very real technologies that are being implemented in this way. So at any rate, think about that. Let's continue with the reading. With the advent of advanced technologies, things like virtual reality and augmented reality, they'll soon be able to actually make perceived physical changes to our world in a way that they couldn't before by simply using these mind control techniques. This will eventually get to the point where we will be unable to tell the difference between the virtual world and the real world. The lines are beginning to blur already right now with the rise of social media and interactive platforms like gaming systems and other electronic devices, and your cell phone in your pocket. Think about this. It's become very hard to determine what's true anymore. With the state of how things have become with deep fakes and various things like this, you don't know what's true and what's correct anymore. And the lines are becoming more and more blurred between what's the fiction and what's the reality. And this is all part and parcel of the programming that they've put into being here. Let's continue reading. The human mind exists in a unique position somewhere between the physical and the spiritual, between the animal and the angelic. Our minds perceive many different worlds. Scientific research has shown that the human brain is capable of perceiving and recognizing up to 11 different dimensions. That's according to mainstream science, ladies and gentlemen. Feel free to look that up. Our minds truly do operate as gateways between worlds. Our minds also represent a limited fractal image of the mind of the Creator. The Bible says that we are created in His image. We are therefore, each of us individually, a fractal aspect of the divine Creator. All of us created in His image, yet reflecting different aspects of His image. Our individuality is what makes us uniquely human. Gonna pause for a moment there. Think about that and reflect upon that. You see, God gave us free will and individuation. Individuality. And there's a reason for that, and that is one of the things that makes us innately human. Now let's read on with that in mind. The inversion of that image would be the image of a collective, a group mind. That is the new image of man that the technocrats want to manufacture. It is a total inversion of the natural order. They cannot control the natural order. That is why they seek to invert the natural sciences. Inversion of the natural sciences in order to achieve control over the world around you has come to be known as cybernetics. By changing the image of man and invoking the Hermetic principle of correspondence, which is sometimes known as above, so below, as below, so above, as within, so without, as without, so within. So, in invoking this Hermetic principle of correspondence, They are attempting to, by proxy, change the image of God. So, get this. I know this is a little bit of an aside here. This is really what they think they can do. By changing the image of man, they think they could correspondingly change the image of God and create themselves to be that God. By changing man to better conform to their inverted image, they then become the gods of man. Think about that. In other words, they are trying to make the gateway principle of the human mind into a two-way conduit. They want to reach through into the archetypal world and make contact, trying to invert the positions and power dynamic of these worlds. They want to touch the mind of God and manifest their will through His creative force. It is an ambitious plan and one fraught with all sorts of problems and dangers. We do not understand the workings of our own consciousness, let alone the consciousness of higher beings, and we certainly don't know what to expect on the quote-unquote other side of the gateway. They're attempting to access the concept of the temple of God. What is the temple of God? I'm going to pause for a moment. Some of you who have been listening for a long time may already know the answer to this question, but it's imperative that in this context, we lay all these things out so we could understand the dangers of what lies ahead in this world, this crazy world in which we live today. Let's continue. The Bible says, "Know ye not that ye are the temple of God?" The human being, mind, body, soul, and spirit, the whole being, is the temple of God. The gateway concept, or the StarGate concept, can only work by accessing the temple of God. Therefore, the transhumanist philosophy is the only way for these technocrats and dark occultists to potentially achieve their goal. I'm going to pause for a moment. They need the human being to be the conduit, the gateway, the StarGate between worlds. But they want to build an artificial new reality with the use of advanced artificial intelligence systems. But it lacks the divine spark and the creative force. Therefore, they need to tie the human being to that. Let's continue. Remember, they are seeking to transmute the gateway into a two-way conduit to access other dimensions, a conduit to the unknown. This could potentially allow energies, information, intelligences, entities, or other abstractions that we may not even be capable to comprehend to manifest in our reality. Could the unnatural modification of the human being create a channel for something akin to the archons of Gnostic traditions to enter into our reality and manifest physically in a human-like form? These ideas are definitely worth taking into consideration before proceeding with this transhumanist agenda. Unfortunately, those who steer these agendas are so desperate to achieve this apotheosis that they cannot see the deception that this agenda is promising them. Instead, they embrace the deception and double down on it. So, we see here, ladies and gentlemen, all of these things are dependent upon merging the artificial intelligence with the human being. And how are they going to do that? Well, Uncle Elon's got a nice brain chip for you. What do you think about that? So what does all this mean in the context of the eschaton, in eschatology? Let's take a look at the prophetic correlations that the transhumanist singularity has with the biblical book of Revelation and some of the tools that are being used to bring this about. And we'll give a brief quote here from Matthew chapter 24, verses 15 and 16. Quote, "When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whosoever readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains." End quote. What is this talking about? This abomination of desolation? Well, this will be a desecrating of the temple of God. And what did we just establish is the temple of God? The human being. Now, with that in mind, let's continue reading from my book, Cybernetic Messiah, Building the Antichrist System, published in 2020, the bulk of which was written in 2019, before we saw this COVID scam unleashed upon the world. The year 2020 was a wild ride. Every day it seemed we were confronted with another seemingly apocalyptic event. Could they be signs of the times? And, of course, we've seen more of this every year since 2020 as well. Are we seeing the prophetic warnings represented in the Bible unfolding before our eyes? Are we witnessing the end of the age? Could all of these events have been carefully planned out and executed by the controlling elites? Any or all of these things could be true. The implementation of the ideas presented in the scriptures by the ruling class could be construed as a self-fulfilling prophecy. That does not in any way reduce the significance of the prophecy being fulfilled. What events have we seen that could be considered prophetic in nature come to fruition in the year 2020 and since then? We've seen numerous natural disasters, enormous wildfires, extreme weather events like hurricanes, earthquakes in many unusual places, strange signs in the sky and the stars. We have witnessed world events that seem to line up with the biblical ideas. Going to pause for a moment. Now remember, I was writing this and publishing this in 2020. And since then, we've only seen these things multiply and become even more extensive, haven't we? And now, giving an example, just from 2020. For instance, we have thus far seen what can be interpreted as the appearance of 3 of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Now, keep this in mind. This was as of 2020. Pestilence, war, and economic collapse have all reared their ugly heads in one way, shape, or form. We have seen wars and rumors of wars, new different types of warfare that have never been universally acknowledged as types of warfare before. Information warfare and war for the mind. Domestic warfare. And it seems they've doubled down since then with these things. All of these things also seem to be ramping up to another well-known prophetic series of events in the book of Revelation. These events that we're referring to here are the events that lead up to the rise of the Antichrist. The time period known as the 7-year tribulation or the Great Tribulation and all of the ideas that accompany it are unfolding before our eyes right now. We have seen a version of Mark of the Beast technology being developed at a rapid pace. This mark was being presented as a quantum dot tattoo injected as a portion of a vaccine, ostensibly as a record of vaccination for the individual. But concurrently, there were also those associated with the developers of those technologies that were planning to use this same type of identification stamp to tie all of the personal data of the individual directly to the financial system, a biometric ID. And I'm going to pause for a moment, ladies and gentlemen. That has always been the plan. And they're now still pushing for a digital ID, which of course is the soft language for a biometric ID. There was also, as you recall, in 2020, a push to end the circulation of physical money and create a universal digital currency that was attached directly to a person's biometric ID. Do you remember that when they tried to do away with coins? They tried to eliminate the use of coins because of the quote-unquote pandemic. Do you remember that? There was a coin shortage? There was never a coin shortage. They tried to convince you of that. Do you remember that? And now what's happening today, 5 years later? Well, they're doing a softer rollout of this as the newly elected Trump administration decided they're going to stop producing the penny. You see, they'll use the excuse of it's wasteful, it costs more to actually make a penny than what the penny's worth. So they use that logical fallacy to begin phasing out physical money, physical currency, a physical means of exchange. We need to hang on to a physical means of exchange. That's one way we can stave off this coming beast system, this StarGate project. So all of this was done under the guise of an alleged pandemic. Of course, we know it now as the COVID scam. The scenario fits every tenet necessary to fulfill biblical prophecy to the letter. None would be able to buy or sell or trade without this mark. There might also be another aspect to this. Now, I'm going to pause for a moment and remember back when they were refusing to let people enter into businesses, stores, restaurants, things of that nature, unless they were able to produce proof of vaccination. Do you remember that? Well, this was a precursor run of the Mark of the Beast system. That was to get people used to the idea of having to show your papers, so to say. And actually, it'll become a lot more invasive than that because they started instituting later phone apps. One was called COVID Pass, if I remember correctly, where you had to have this. You would put this digital tracker thing on your phone, and you would be able to show that at a place of business to get in, that you had your proof of vaccination and everything else. And they started making it so in order to travel internationally, to fly internationally, you had to produce this certification that you had been vaccinated. Do you remember all of this? Oh, I most assuredly do, because I was warning people about this before it even happened. And it did happen. And thankfully, people were beginning to wake up to this and not really liking the implications here. And we've taken a step or two back from that, but I assure you it is coming back in the near future, perhaps in some other form, if these people get their way. But I hope we've made enough inroads with these types of programs that we produce here to make people wake up to what's going on. So the aspect of this that I alluded to in the book when I said here in this last paragraph that there might also be another aspect to this, we've seen evidence of this, what I was suggesting here, come to fruition since then. What is that? Let me read on. That aspect has to do with the utilization of invasive nanotechnology. This same delivery system for the Mark of the Beast, the vaccine, can be provably used to inject nanomaterials that can interact with wireless EMF signals to achieve different ends. It can also be used to fundamentally change the human body at the cellular level. This has everything to do with transhumanism. There's a large push on to mandate a vaccine for this alleged coronavirus pandemic. Gonna pause for a moment. Remember, I wrote this book before the vaccine came out and before there was a mandate for the vaccine. That's how long they've been planning this stuff. That's how long many of us have been calling it out. let's continue reading, because this really shows my thought process in the writing of this as things were just beginning to manifest in 2020 around this. It makes no sense to even develop a vaccine for this virus for several reasons. First, it is a coronavirus, allegedly, the same class of virus that is the common cold, and they have never been able to successfully develop a vaccine for a coronavirus in the past, and they still haven't, ladies and gentlemen, other than this, which they miraculously did in record time, in a warp speed process, as you'll recall. And who's responsible for Project Warp Speed? Well, it's the same guy that's in office right now that's responsible for the StarGate program. Let's read on. I went on to point out that secondarily, this alleged pandemic had an extremely low mortality rate, and the symptoms were generally mild in most of the population. In fact, it was so mild that they claimed that you may not even know you had it. They also claimed that you could spread the virus without even having any symptoms, and that defies common sense. Still does defy common sense, doesn't it? So the premise that you could spread a virus that doesn't even make you sick is preposterous and disingenuous at best, and outright social engineering at the worst. They also mandated in many areas the use of face masks to ostensibly reduce the spread of the contagion. So to be clear, this is what they were telling us, remember. You must wear a mask so that you do not spread a disease that you don't have to other people who are wearing masks so they don't spread a disease they don't have. There is, and there was, no scientific evidence that proves that wearing masks outside of a hospital setting has any effect whatsoever on the spread of contagion, and that is still true today. And yet there's still people walking around with masks on out there, aren't there? That's how good these people have become at socially engineering the masses. Complete violation of common sense, and yet it's become the new norm, hasn't it? Further, if the mitigation efforts that have been put in place were in any way effective, the contagion would stop spreading and die off. Likewise, if those mitigation efforts did work, why would they need to develop a vaccine? The premise that the illness will die off or die out is also disingenuous. Now think about this. I'm just pointing out the contradictions that are stated in the mainstream science of all of this. Now think about these things. The whole purpose of them shutting down the world for 2 weeks, do you remember that? 2 weeks to flatten the curve, people not going anywhere, was so that this thing dies off and disappears. Never happened like that, did it? And why would they think that it would? Why would they think that would work? It's stupid. And it's stupid on several levels, and especially for those who trust the science. It's stupid for this following reason that I recorded in my book here. Viruses, according to the mainstream description, are not a living thing, so how exactly would they die off? The alleged pandemic was used as a convenient excuse to exercise draconian control measures over the masses. It destroyed businesses and economies, tore families apart, and left a path of destruction in its wake like nothing we've ever seen. And all of these effects were not the result of this alleged virus itself, but the result of the unified world government response to a crisis that had not really shown to be anything more severe than a slightly bad flu season. The overreaction was blatantly obvious. Remember, I wrote all of this in early 2020. Keep that in mind. The bulk of the book I wrote in 2019, the end of 2019, and into early 2020. And as these things were being unleashed on us in real time, I began adding to my manuscript with this stuff just to point out how all of this ties directly to the things that they want to engineer in this world, primarily the transhumanist singularity. Let's read on. A large amount of long-term planning went into this pandemic response. This was all premeditated. And it was premeditated for a reason other than for the health and well-being of the masses. This scenario was worked out in detail by multiple think tank groups, and the plan was implemented when this alleged pandemic virus came on the scene. The whole situation has never been about health, and it was always about setting up the infrastructure for the transhuman control grid, or what I would call it, the Antichrist System. Nothing personifies the archetype of the Antichrist spirit more than transhumanism. Transhumanism is the ultimate affront to God and nature. This is the equivalent of humanity thumbing its nose at God and saying, "We are greater than you." This is the most hubristic attitude and philosophical concept that has ever come to see the light of day. The bottom line is this: the alleged pandemic was being used as a vehicle to steer us directly into a transhumanist future. Doubt it not. Regardless of what your stance is upon whether this virus was real or if it's fake or whatever this thing is, whether it was a real emergency or not, it only matters that the situation was being used to set up this infrastructure for the coming beast system. This surveillance grid will be rolled out at first as the Internet of Things, connecting all of your devices to the grid. It's just a matter of time until you too are connected to the grid. This is the plan. The covert placement of nanotech networks in the human body through various delivery systems will make this eventuality achievable at the flip of a switch. This will be the transhumanist singularity. The moment all of our collective consciousnesses go online. My personal belief is that this event will correspond to the biblical idea of the rapture. This is the separation of the wheat from the chaff. Was it possible that this alleged pandemic was one of the catalysts that would bring in this new age of transhumanism? Is it still possible now that we're witnessing the fruition of biblical prophecy in this coming transhumanist system? And I'll remind you of the words from Matthew chapter 24. When you therefore see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, what is this abomination of desolation, and what is the holy place? Know ye not that ye are the temple of God? You, the human being, are the holy place. The abomination of desolation is the spirit of Antichrist, that which seeks to destroy and usurp the divine sovereignty given to man by the Creator. The inversion of the natural world is also the abomination of desolation, or the spirit of Antichrist. The transhumanist singularity is the ultimate rejection of the Holy Spirit of God and the rejection of nature. Is it possible that this pandemic situation that they created was the great deception spoken of in the Bible? Now think about this, and I think maybe, in hindsight, maybe it was a smaller version of this. But these are truly concerns. Was this the great deception? Is this the great deception? Are we seeing the great deception laid out before us now? It's hard to tell for sure. It says in the Bible, even the very elect have been given over to strong delusion. People have sacrificed their individuality and their free will to the delusion, and they represented that during this pandemic situation by covering their faces. This is the first small step into the transhumanist philosophy, the collectivization of humanity. You are no longer an individual, you are part of the collective. The greater good now takes precedent over the individual. This philosophy therefore eliminates ideas like personal property, intellectual property, individual rights and freedoms, and limits how you are allowed to use your resources and even to limit the things you are allowed to think. Remember, Klaus Schwab tells us you will own nothing and you'll be happy. I wrote about this years before anybody was paying attention to Klaus Schwab or the World Economic Forum. Now, why is it that I was able to make these predictions? Not because I'm anything special, but because they've written about it in their own white papers and think tank policy papers. And it's been given to us in the form of the scriptures in the Bible. And you can compare and contrast these things with the writings of these technocrat psychopaths. Now let's continue, because remember, I said there will even be limits on what you're allowed to think. Under this system, the thought police will become a very real thing. Your perceptions will be controlled and monitored by the system. It will blend virtual reality with the physical world in real time. This augmented reality existence will fundamentally change the way the human mind works. This is necessary for the transhumanist beast system to function in the intended way. In fact, we are already being altered and changed to capitulate to this system. Our brains are being changed to make us more compatible with artificial intelligence. This is underway already and ramping up at a fever pitch. The technocrats can't build an artificial intelligence system that measures up to the human mind, so the tact they've taken on this issue is to lower the mind down to a compatible level with artificial intelligence. So think about this. Cybernetics is being applied to merge the mind of man with the machine. And we are being engineered so that we can be at parity with the machine. And we have seen this manifest in a number of ways in this world. The lowering of the human mind. So think about that. What's being brought about here? You see, all of these things are coming to fruition before our very eyes. And a lot of the building of this infrastructure is going on behind the scenes, has been for a very long time. And now they've rolled it out publicly to the tune of $500 billion in investment being publicly disclosed here. They're talking about this. They're doing this stuff now quietly behind the scenes because they've distracted you with other issues. Oh, look at all the government corruption that we found. So it would appear that we are seeing the beginning phases of this advent of the transhumanist singularity being put into place by the building of this new StarGate AI infrastructure. And what did we say the StarGate is? Well, plain and simply, it's inferring the presence of the spirit of Lucifer merged with the human being and the machine into this state of collectivism in a way in which we have never seen the likes of before, at least not in the recorded history of things. So we have all of this coming to fruition before our very eyes here, and this is constituent with an artificial alchemical transmutation of man into something other than what he is. So the StarGate, there's a very real occult connotation built into the name of this system, and if you think it's a coincidence, well, I don't know how much more I can help you. I don't have enough faith to be a coincidence theorist. There's a very real reason that they give these projects the names that they do, and it always, always, always ties back to the occult. Each and every single time, as much of an uncomfortable truth as that is, It's always there, it's always present, and it never ceases to amaze me how people could turn a blind eye to all of it, or call it a coincidence, or say I'm an alarmist, even though I accurately told you what was coming to pass years ahead of time. Not through any special power of intuition I have, but only by observing what it is that they tell us, and going back and looking at what it is that they teach and they believe in these occult fraternities and secret society groups. What are the principles they believe in and act upon, and regardless of whether you believe any of it or not is irrelevant. What you need to understand is there are people in positions of power in this world that very much believe in these precepts, and the things they do to act upon them will affect all of us, and we are most certainly seeing that today, right now, are we not? Doesn't matter what you believe. That's irrelevant. Who's calling the shots? What do they believe? That has the ability to change the image of our reality around us. And that's what's being done. You have this small select group of dark occultists who run things, and their minions, the technocrats beneath them, that make things happen and come to fruition here in this world, and they vampirize our energy to do so. They steer your thoughts and your opinions, and they therefore acquire your metaphysical consent to these things. If you're unaware of what the tools are that they're using, and that's what I'm here to point out, the tools that they use, the metaphysical tools as well as the physical tools. So when you watch your next episode of Black Mirror or some such thing, I don't know, I've never watched any of those, but people inform me all the time that they reveal an awful lot of stuff about the future on there, or what's envisioned for the future on there. Keep that in mind. The entertainment is the means in which they steer and influence you and obtain your metaphysical consent to these things. Entertainment to go in and capture the mind. That's what they've been very good at. Because they need the mind, the human mind. They need the human being to pull this off. Otherwise, it's all for naught, in their view. So what is the mystery of the StarGate? You are the StarGate, ladies and gentlemen. They need you to get this done. They're looking to bring into manifestation in this world the unnatural. That which does not occur here on God's green earth in this natural creation. They want to build a wholly synthetic reality. And they could only do so by tapping into that creative force and divine spark that the human being has been gifted by our Creator in order to bring things into manifestation. And they plan on doing that by merging us with the artificial intelligence, turning us into a collective hive mind with no free will of our own. In the end, it will be only one entity or one intelligence guiding and directing all things. And I assure you, that intelligence, that transhumanist intelligence, that artificial intelligence that manifests as the collective Borg hive mind of humanity, will most likely name itself Lucifer. That's my assessment on all of it, based upon the occult information out there, and also based upon what they are talking about in the mainstream scientific circles around transhumanism and its fruition, and around the development of artificial intelligence. It always ties to these two ends. occultism on one side and the advent of the transhumanist singularity at the other. One is the fulfillment of the other. That's what they are looking for. That is what they want. And I've got good news. They're getting a lot more pushback than what they have anticipated. And we can still turn things around and go the other way and achieve our full potential as human beings and attaining that next spiritual step towards what God intended here for us, rather than going the other direction as the materialists and the atheists and the transhumanists and all of the other ists out there would want us to go. We could take it the other way because we're becoming more aware of these devious plans that have been carried out in the darkness, in the shadows, for a very long time, and they're all being brought to the light of day. We are indeed living in the time of revelation. All of these things are being shown to us in the light of day, the veils being torn away, and we are witnessing what is truly happening behind the scenes with this. But only if you have the eyes to see, if you're not in denial, if you haven't been lulled into a slumber still by their mind control programming. And we're still seeing people awaken to this. We'll take whatever victories we get along the way here. Let's not forget to celebrate some of the victories that we have been having. Although I suspect there's darker things going on behind the scenes as well. We'll take the good where we have it. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for tuning in tonight, and I'll remind you that I appreciate each and every one of you. We'll catch you next time. Have a good one now.